Welcome to the webinar. We're going to talk about fraud in online marketing today. Before I introduce the speakers, let me quickly give you an overview of what we'll be covering today. We're going to talk about bots. Let's see if this works. Yes, we're going to talk about bots, the most common and exotic patterns in ad fraud, its impact on GDPR consent rates, and you'll get 3 tips how to detect fraud traffic on your site. Yeah, before we get started, some housekeeping rules. Everything will be recorded and shared afterwards. If you have any questions, please submit them at any time. We have some time at the end to go through them. So we have 3 speakers today. My name is Tilman Pfeiffer. I'm one of the co-founders of Fraud Zero. We're a Munich-based detection company. We work very closely with User-Centric and Dr. Augustine, who are also joining in this webinar. We do mainly 2 things. We verify GDPR consents, and we allow marketeers to protect their marketing spend. So also in this webinar, Tilman Hameling, entrepreneur in residence at User-Centric. Most of you use User-Centric already. For those of you who don't know it, it's a consent management platform, and the company is specialized in optimizing GDPR consent rates. Great to have you in the webinar, Tilman. Also, our main speaker today, Dr. Augustine Fu, dialing in from the US. Welcome, Dr. Fu. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's really a great pleasure having you in the webinar. A quick intro. He's an industry recognized thought leader on the topic of ad fraud, former chief digital officer at Omnicom, $100 million agency, has over 25 years of management consulting experience, taught at Rutgers Uni at NYU, and completed his PhD in material science and engineering at the MIT at the age of 23, and then started his career at McKinsey. He's regularly published, quoted on Wall Street journals, Forbes, CNBC, just to name a few, and always on the topic of ad fraud. So it's fantastic that you take the time. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. So I would say we get started right away. The topic of today's webinar is fraud. And for fraudsters, bots are the weapon of choice. So what bots are, we'll get to in a minute, but already up front, bots are very, very good at repetitive tasks. So they can run tirelessly and perform tasks much more efficiently than a human ever could, like clicking 1,000-fold on your ad or scraping all the data of your site. And the internet is full of bots. In fact, as you can see on the slides, close to 40% are actually bots, and humans are only 60% of internet traffic. So what do we mean by a bot? Bot traffic is simply a request that is made by an automated process rather than an actual human. So obviously there's a wide range of those. We have quite a lot of good bots as well, and the internet largely depends on these good bots. Search engines being the most obvious ones. For example, the Google bot, who crawls the web to index your site. But equally, there are a lot of bad bot activity. There's a lot of bad bot activity out there, and bad bots can be used for a variety of different fraudulent activities. And this slide sort of just gives you a quick overview. Bots, they click on your ad, they fill out forms, they take over your customer's account, they commit payment fraud. And today we'll talk about ad fraud. So bots clicking on your ads and faking impressions. And the big question that marketeers should be asking themselves is, how much of the traffic that is coming to your site as a result of your digital marketing initiatives is actually human, as opposed to sophisticated bots that just kind of look like humans. So bots pretending to be regular users can have dramatic impact. It impacts all your retargeting campaigns. It results in your salespeople trying to contact people who don't actually exist. So time and money wasted, no conversions inside. Dr. Augustine Fu will tell us more about that in a second. Just one more thing that I want to highlight is inaccurate marketing data. So bots mess with your analytics as they generate fake clicks and fake traffic. And Google Analytics only filters for bots that declare themselves, such as the good ones, the Facebook bot and the Google bot. So bots that deliberately disguise themselves, like the bad bots we're talking about here, are not detected. And this fake traffic will appear in your Google Analytics alongside your legitimate traffic. So if you have a lot of bot traffic, your analytics will be messed up. And messed up analytics can lead to bad management decisions. Bots are very, very different from hacking, even though the people behind them may be the same group of people. Hackers look for technical weaknesses and to carry out activities and try to bypass your defenses. Bots carry out legitimate activities on your site. So they do exactly the same thing like real visitor would do. They fill out forms and click on your ads, etc. Bots have evolved over the years, and what used to be only traffic from data centers is nowadays most of the bots live on our actual user devices, and they're able to closely mimic human behavior. Dr. Fu will talk more about some of the techniques how to catch them in a second. And what used to be simple beer money is now organized crime with 2-week sprints. Handing over to my colleague Tilman Haverding from User-Centric, who will talk about what user-centric views on the topic is.
Yes, thank you very much, Tilman. Funny, my name is also Tilman, and I'm responsible for data science at User-Centrics with the main task of optimizing opt-ins. And usually when customers come to me or to us, they have questions about how our reporting works and how they can improve the opt-in rates. And more when they go to the reporting section of the admin interface, they have a couple of questions. And one of them is, how is it possible that so many visitors are not interacting with the CMP? And the question is absolutely valid. I mean, if you want to get information about the last football game, for example, would you leave here in a scenario like that one? I mean, well, 19% are. And our next example, if you go to a website and you're looking for a present for your wife or for your husband, for example, like some flowers, would you leave from this website? And the same situation is here. Well, 24% are leaving and don't interact with the privacy solution. So we know about the ratios and the rates, but there's one thing that is still a little bit unclear. I mean, 31.8% of the visitors of our customers are not interacting with the privacy solution. 62.6% are interacting, and the question here is, how much of those are bots? And together with Fraud Zero, our company User-Centrics tests if bots click on your privacy banner. If you want to sign up for a free test, please contact Tilman Pfeiffer. From my experience, one thing is guaranteed. I have never seen a customer who was not surprised by the results, because bots are totally underestimated out there. And with that, I want to hand over to Dr. Fu.
All right, thank you. Let me make sure I can change the slides. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to talk a little bit about what ad fraud is, and in particular, we're focused on digital advertising, because the intersection with the consent banner is that the humans are asked to give consent both to receive digital advertising and also to get cookies and get tracked across sites, because that's how programmatic digital advertising works. So for the purposes of this presentation, we'll focus primarily on ad fraud. and how bots are playing a role in that. So we'll start at the very basic. We talked about, what are bots, but when we apply it to digital advertising, most advertisers expect that their banners or their ads are being shown when a human comes to a website. But because things are now being automated with programmatic technologies, the bots and the fraudsters are basically creating many, many fake websites and using bots, which are basically fake users, to load as many pages as possible and therefore generate billions upon billions of impressions. So I'll bring some examples from the US because we've been kind of doing the programmatic for a very long time, and there's also many examples of fraud that we've uncovered here. So I think some of the examples you'll be seeing are primarily from the US. But if you imagine the bots are loading the ads and they're also clicking on them, just like Tillman said before, it's also messing up your analytics because sometimes you're going to see a lot of clicks, but those clicks are not from humans and they're from bots. So sometimes the advertisers are tricked into allocating more budget to those sources or sites that appear to have higher clicks. And that's how the bots are able to trick the marketers into allocating more budget to fake websites. Okay. So when we talk about digital ad fraud, there's two main kinds. There's many variations of it, but I primarily focus on these two because it's the two primary payment mechanisms for digital ads. It's either paid on a CPM basis, which means cost per thousand, cost per mille, or on a CPC basis, which is cost per click. So most of the impressions like mobile display ads, mobile display, video ads, and things like that are usually paid on a CPM basis. So the bot's job is to create as many impressions as possible because they will get paid for every 1,000 times those ads load. On the right-hand side, when we talk about click fraud, it's a little bit more advanced because it's a two-step process. They have to cause the ad to load, and then they have to click on it. So this applies to search ads, and that also means mobile search and so on and so forth. So these bots are a little bit more advanced because they're going to cause the search ad to load, and then they're going to click on it in order to get paid. And over the years, we've actually seen some greedy bots, which basically click on all the search ads. So we see sometimes 100% click-through rate. And that's because they have to click it in order for them to get paid. So, those are things that we've seen over the years. So when we talk about how the bad guys are able to create fake digital ads, it's actually, we can boil it down into a very simple process. It's almost like a three-step process. First is to set up fake websites. Second is to buy fake traffic. And third is to sell the fake ads that they produce. So over the years, because of programmatic advertising or programmatic technologies, the advertisers are not going to big publishers and buying ads directly from them. So previously, maybe 10 years ago, big advertisers would go to a publisher and say, can we buy ads and place ads on your site? So it would be directly negotiated. Now with programmatic advertising, we have things like ad exchanges or ad networks, which involve hundreds of thousands of sites, many of which people haven't even heard of before, right? So when we have an ad exchange that has hundreds of thousands of sites, it actually makes it easier for the fraudster to create many, many fake sites and make those part of that exchange so that they can actually start selling ad impressions. So this tiny screenshot here is only used there to illustrate that this is a site that has no content whatsoever. The only things that you see on there are ads, right? There's like 10 ads, 15 ads, sometimes 100 ads on the page and nothing else. So you set up these fake websites, but these sites have no traffic because humans don't even know they exist, right? So how do they get the traffic? So the second thing they have to do is actually go out and buy the traffic. So when, if you actually want to Google that, just do a search, buy traffic for my website, or just buy web traffic. There's going to be lots and lots of vendors who are out there selling you that traffic. And in fact, you could even say, buy realistic traffic, or buy human traffic, or buy, zero fraud traffic or something. So these vendors and these bot makers have already tested their traffic, and they know for sure that they get by traditional fraud detection technologies. So that's the second step. When they buy the traffic, those bots are repeatedly loading the web pages. And if you do a simple thought exercise, just think about, there's not a whole bunch of humans sitting around with nothing to do but to go to your particular website over and over again, right? So it's a job that's much more easily performed by bots, right? Like Tillman was saying earlier, bots can just do repetitive tasks very, very well, very, very quickly, right? So you can't get a whole bunch of humans to go to your site, but you certainly can get millions of bots to load millions of web pages, right? So that's how they create the traffic. So when you have all these web views, right, web page views, now you can sell billions and billions of ad impressions, and that's what we're actually seeing happening. So these are billions of impressions sold. Again, you can't really see in the small graphic, but some of these are domains or mobile apps that you've never heard of before, but yet they're selling hundreds of millions, if not billions of ad impressions per month, right? So this is actually a very large business for the fraudsters. So, then the next logical question is, why is ad fraud bad, right? Everyone should understand that. It should be common sense, but let me articulate it a little bit more specifically. So when the advertisers are spending their digital budgets online, they assume that their ads are being shown to humans. But when bots are now active in the mix, the ads are not being shown to humans. They're being shown to bots. And so for the advertisers, they're not getting what they paid for. They're not going to get the marketing outcomes from the digital marketing that they're doing. And on top of that, in addition to the advertisers being hurt, the publishers are also hurt, because for every dollar that the advertiser spends, less than that dollar is actually making it through to the publishers, because it's kind of like highway robbery, right? The dollars are actually being stolen by the bad guys. So they go to these fake sites, they go to the bot makers, go to the traffic sellers, and it's not going to the publishers. So the publishers, the ones who actually create content for human audiences, those good publishers are also being hurt, right? Because the dollars are being stolen out of the ecosystem. And then, of course, the bad guys are the ones that benefit most from that. So it's almost like this big, huge red arrow where the dollars are being diverted out of the ecosystem and into the pockets of the bad guys, right? So why do the bad guys do this? It's because it's the absolute most profitable criminal activity you could possibly do, right? So when you compare it to investing in stocks or putting your money in the bank that earns 1% interest, or making, assume you make a 10% return in the stock market, that pales in comparison to the thousands of percent return from doing ad fraud. And on top of that, it's even easier than trying to rob a bank, right? You don't have to risk your life pulling out a gun and trying to rob a bank and then having to move the money somewhere. In this case, the criminals are actually sitting behind a computer screen in the comfort of their own homes, perhaps even in pajamas. And they're basically causing or buying the traffic that bots are creating and pointing it to their websites, and so they can generate millions, if not billions, of ad impressions, and the money just comes right into their bank account. So what's easier than digital ad fraud, right? So it's easy, it's scalable, it's highly profitable. So what criminal wouldn't want to get in on this, right? So that's why we see a lot of bad guys actually getting in on these activities. So like we were saying before, both advertisers and publishers are harmed. Now let me give you a few more specific examples. Again, some of these are taken from the US. So when we talk about the legitimate publishers, there are both big publishers and small publishers. And just using this example of local news, right? So these are small local newspapers, right? They started in the physical world with actual physical newspapers, but they also have websites. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these small websites around the country here in the US. So when digital came along, they also added websites and they also added digital advertising, hoping to make money through digital ads. But now, if those dollars are being diverted into the pockets of the bad guys, those dollars are not going to these local news sites. So in this case, history has shown us that over the last 15 years, 2,000 local newspaper sites or local newspaper companies have died and gone away. And it's also led to even very large newspaper companies like McClatchy here in the US to file for bankruptcy because they literally cannot survive. They cannot make enough money off of digital advertising because the dollars are not going to them. They're going to criminals, right? And what that's created is what they call local news deserts. So all across the US here, there are local communities that no longer have a local newspaper, right? So some of these are just the effects that have played out over the last 10 years. And here in the US, with the elections coming up in November, the lack of real local newspapers means that there's a lack of real local news. And what's come to fill the void are fake news sites, right? So it's those same ad dollars that are now fueling fake news sites, right? So again, over the years, we've now seen examples of how entirely fake sites are able to make money through digital advertising. So this was an investigation from BuzzFeed News about a year ago, where they found examples of fake local news sites. So one of them is called AlbanyDailyNews.com, and the other one is called CityofEdmontonNews.com. So a US one and a Canadian one. And on the surface, if you just look at the site, you can't tell that it's entirely fake. But when you actually look at the stories, right? Again, if you're not living in Albany or living in Edmonton, you actually don't know what's a real local story or a fake one, right? So it's really hard to tell what's fake news. But these sites are entirely fake, and they're using ad tech to make money. So previously, it was much harder and much more costly to spread disinformation and fake news. But in this case, because we have programmatic ad tech, and because of the ease with which these sites can add themselves into ad exchanges and start making money from digital advertising, these fake news sites now have a funding source, right? They can make money from digital advertising and keep expanding. Now, if they wanted to make more money, and there's only a small number of humans that accidentally go there, assuming it's a real news site, they can just supplement it with bot traffic, right? So they can actually artificially increase their own ad revenue by just using more and more bot traffic, right? So now on top of that, the big mainstream sites are also at risk of what we call domain spoofing. So these fake sites actually have to pretend to be legitimate mainstream sites in order to get bids. So when we talk about real-time bidding, so the process of buying and selling ads in digital programmatic means when a ad slot becomes available and says, here's this opportunity for you to show an ad, it's going to make an offer or a bid request to a marketer to say, who wants to bid on showing an ad in this ad slot? So in that case, if they put, say, fakesite123.com in the bid request, no one's going to bid on that, right? It's just too obvious it's a fake site. So these fake sites always have to pretend to be mainstream sites, right? So here in the US, it would be like they would pretend to be New York Times. They would pretend to be Wall Street Journal. They would pretend to be ESPN. So that's what we call domain spoofing. So they're pretending to be these mainstream sites so that they can get bids. But ultimately, the dollars still flow to them. And none of the mainstream sites are even involved in the fraud scheme, right? So that's how even the big sites are now at risk of losing money to these fraudsters. Okay. The other effect that's happening to big publishers. So again, we're using some examples here because we have both publishers and marketers in the audience. So this is mainly for the publishers to understand how ad fraud affects them, right? So one other important effect for publishers is that their audiences are being stolen. So I'm going to use a very specific example from the pharmaceutical industry. So there are oncologists, right? Doctors who focus on the practice of oncology or the science of cancer. And there are certain publications like Journal of Clinical Oncology, right? Where all the oncologists go. So previously, prior to ad tech or programmatic ad tech, they would all go to this medical journal site, Journal of Clinical Oncology. And so that's the only place that marketers can reach this audience of oncologists by showing them ads there. But when I say in the top of the slide, audiences are being stolen by bad tech, what that means is that we're using cookies to match these users that visited JCO and show them ads when they appear on other websites. Okay, so let me take a step back and reiterate this process. So normally oncologists would go to Journal of Clinical Oncology or New England Journal of Medicine and other medical journal websites, right? And so we kind of deduce that they are doctors or oncologists because they don't tell us that. They're not logged into the website, but we can kind of derive that they are oncologists because they visited those sites. So what the bots are doing, they're also now deliberately visiting these medical journal sites so that, oh, well, we see this user here, they visited all these medical journal sites, they must be an oncologist, right? So what that's doing is basically the bots are pretending to be a certain audience so that when the marketers show them ads, they're actually earning higher CPMs, and they're earning that for these fake sites because when they show up on these fake sites and the ad loads there, those sites make the money. So not only are the audiences being stolen by the fake sites, the bots are now causing more and more of those dollars to not go to the medical journal sites, but to these other fake sites. So they're again diverting more revenue away from the good publishers to the fake sites. Okay. So finally, we talk about privacy. So if you look at this chart, again, it's, there's so much stuff on there, it's really even hard to see. But on the very left-hand side where we have the little number 1, that's basically one web page. And then what you see in the rest of the chart is what we call a tree graph, right? Where one page loads in hundreds and hundreds of other ads and trackers. So again, when the user, the consumer, is visiting one web page, they assume they're interacting with that one publisher, but they don't know that all of these ads and trackers are being loaded by third-party companies behind the scenes, right? So in fact, when an ad loads, the ad itself could call 10 other trackers into the page. And sometimes the publisher doesn't even know that that's happening. The user certainly doesn't know that that's happening. So when we think about this in the context of consent management, right, most of the users don't even know any of these ad tech companies, and they certainly wouldn't have given them consent to collect their information, sell their data, and retarget them, and so on and so forth. So again, publishers should be aware that other third-party tech can load in many, many other ads and trackers without their knowledge. Right, and in fact, they could be violating the consumer's privacy, and the publisher might end up getting blamed because the consumer said, oh, well, all of this stuff happened when I visited this publisher's website, right? So publishers need to be aware of all these dangers. Okay, so now let me focus for a few minutes on the harms that come to the marketers, right? Very simply, we can say, and we've said this before, that if the ads are not shown to humans, the marketers are wasting their ad dollars, right? So it's not going to have any kind of business outcomes if the ads are not being shown to humans. On top of that, when the marketer is buying ads through programmatic channels, you can see here that the ad tech middlemen take 40 to 60%. So let's just say half for simplicity, right? So half of your dollar goes into the pockets of the ad tech middlemen instead of to showing the ads, right? So of course it's legitimate. This is not fraud, but all the middlemen, they're basically, because they're providing services, like the ad exchange is providing some services, the data sellers are providing some services, right? So all of these ad tech middlemen have to make money, right? So they're increasing their own revenues by absorbing some of your dollar, right? So in this case, 3 studies from the WFA, World Federation of Advertisers, the ANA here in the US, Association of National Advertisers, and then most recently from the ISBA, which is the equivalent for British advertisers. All 3 of these industry-wide studies have shown that the ad tech middlemen are getting about half of your dollar. So again, every time you spend $1, only 50 cents is going to show ads. Right, so again, right off the bat, that's a 50% tax on your dollar. So, and that's because you're buying through programmatic. And it's going to be very different if you buy directly from the publisher, because then when you pay the publisher, they're using most of your dollar to actually showing the ad. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? Less than a whole dollar is actually going to showing the ads. And let me see. Let me try to change this slide. Okay. Can you help? Okay, yes, perfect. So how do we know that some of the advertisers are not seeing the kind of returns that they should be seeing in digital? So there's been a couple of examples. Let's actually go back up one slide. P&G, for example, here in the US in 2018, cut $200 million from their digital spend. And basically, they saw no change in business outcomes. That's 200 million. So most marketers can't afford to cut that much. But for them, basically cutting $200 million of digital spend, they saw no change in business outcomes. Similarly, when Chase, a big bank here in the US, when they cut their programmatic reach from 400,000 websites to just 5,000 websites, that means previously their ads were being shown on 400,000 websites. And then after that, they went to a whitelist approach, right? So they said, we only want our ads to be shown on these 5,000 websites. When they did that, which is a 99% reduction in reach, they saw no change in business outcomes. And then there's one more example. Okay, sorry, I got those two in the wrong order. But the third one is Uber. When Uber cut 80% of their programmatic ad budgets, they saw no change in business outcomes. So basically what Uber was doing is they were doing paid mobile ads to try to get more people to download and install the Uber app. So when they paused that ad spending, what they observed was that the app installs kept happening. And you can kind of understand why that's happening, right? Humans want to install the Uber app anyway, not because they saw an ad and clicked on it, but because they wanted to install the app. So in that case, we call those organic installs. When they were doing paid mobile advertising to try to get those installs, some of those organic installs were actually characterized as paid installs when it was actually fraudulent. And now Uber is actually suing 100 mobile exchanges for that kind of ad fraud, right? So in these cases, the moral of the story is for any marketer that's actually on this webinar to look more carefully into their own digital marketing programs to see if there's evidence of fraud, right? So you might say, oh, well, we have fraud detection in place, right? There's these big companies like DoubleVerify, Integral Ad Signs that are providing fraud detection. So we've already got that. We think we're covered. But what happens if the fraudsters are actively altering the measurement or tricking the measurement or just blocking the measurement tags, right? So again, as a researcher, what I've seen over the years is that here's an example where even a mainstream site like Newsweek publishing group is actually using malicious JavaScript code to alter the measurement, right? To alter the viewability measurement. So some of the ads that were previously not viewable are now made to appear to be viewable so that they can be sold to advertisers. So this is just one example. There's been many, many examples over the years where the bots are actively tricking the measurement, right? So if those technologies are tuned for looking for bots, the bots can trick their detection so that they get marked as valid, right? They will not get detected as a bot. They will not get detected as invalid traffic. And so even though those fraud detection technologies are being used, just look at this list of fake websites and fake apps. Okay, let me just call them sites and apps. Just look closely, right? Would anyone on this webinar consider these to be real sites or real apps, right? Actually, just think about trying to type that in. I couldn't even type in any of these domains because it's letters and numbers, and it would take me 10 minutes to try to get that right, right? So humans can't actually type any of these domains to actually go there. So how are these domains selling millions of impressions into programmatic? And this is all after fraud detection was supposed to have caught the fraudsters, right? So the moral of the story here is that even though there are bot detection technologies that companies are paying for, don't assume that they can catch everything, right? And there's another big problem here that I want to bring out. So you might have heard the term black box, right? So I call these black box fraud detection technologies because they simply tell you a number like 1% bots or 1% IVT, but then they don't explain to you how they did the measurement. They also don't tell you how much of the impressions they could even measure, right? So if the bots are blocking their detection, or if the bots are tricking their detection, they literally don't know. They can't measure it. So their technology is black box in the sense that they don't explain to you how they measured it. So you, the marketer, have no way to verify whether they measured it correctly or not, or whether they detected all the bots or not. So let me just use this very simple example to illustrate. Those bot detection technologies, again, their algorithms are tuned for looking for bots. So they can detect the 1.3%, right? On that left-hand side, the bot detection will see that 1.3%. But they're going to miss a lot of the other forms of fraud that are not technically bots hitting a web page, right? So as more and more dollars shift into mobile, and especially as those dollars shift into mobile apps, or when it shifts into video and other channels, these bot detection technologies literally are not tuned to catch those bots. They're not able to see it. So using just this one example, here's 57% more fraud that we can see in the data that is simply not detected by bot detection technologies. So if you just took their number, the 1%, you're missing out on fraud that is 60 times bigger than that, right? So again, the moral of the story for the advertisers, for the marketers in this webinar, is to always double check. Don't just assume that the fraud detection technology companies have caught all the fraud for you. So it's good that you use them, but don't assume that that means that's all the fraud there is. Okay, so now it gets to the very last portion of our presentation, which is a couple of recommendations and tips on how to catch this yourself. Right. So some of these will come across as completely common sense, but again, you'd find that many marketers are not looking at their own analytics often enough. Right. So all of these things you can actually find in your own Google Analytics, for example. So let me just use a few examples here. So the first thing is, the first pattern to watch would be anything that's too high or too low, you should treat with suspicion. You should look into it, you should investigate it further. So for example, when you see traffic coming through to your site and you see 100% bounce rates, something's wrong with that, right? You should investigate. Why is there 100% bounce rate? That means they left right away. So humans, if they click through to your site, they probably wanted to look for something there. And so they probably stick around for more than 0 seconds, right? So when you see 100% bounce rates or 0 seconds on the site, investigate it further, right? Again, very common sense. You can see it in your own analytics. The second would be anything that's too random or too consistent, you should check out, right? So look at that with suspicion. So for example, if you see the same quantity of traffic every single day from a particular source, something's wrong with that. You can't get a whole bunch of humans to behave exactly the same way day after day. That just doesn't happen, right? But it's very easy for bots to do that, right? A bot maker or a botnet can say, go hit this website exactly 1,000 times a day, right? So then day after day, it's the exact same number. So it's very easy for botnets to do that. So when you see the same traffic or maybe the same spikes in traffic, right? So every day at midnight, you get the same spike. Okay, how does that occur? Repeatedly every single day. Humans don't do that. Bots do that, right? So again, look into it. And the third thing would be anything that doesn't make common sense, right? That's kind of our catch-all bucket. Right, so for example, if we see large volumes of traffic coming through in the overnight hours, common sense will tell you humans are sleeping, or some humans have to sleep, right? So there shouldn't be a large volume of traffic coming through in the overnight hours. So again, look into that if you see those telltale signs in your analytics. But on top of that, let me show you a few additional things that we look at when we have some additional analytics tools. So we have a tool set that these are analytics where we can put a tag on a website and we can actually measure for bot activity and human activity. And then similarly, we can put a tag into the ad impressions and again, see if the ads are being loaded by bots. Right? So what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides before we wrap up is basically some screenshots from the dashboard. So here, just to explain the colors, the dark red means bots and the dark blue means humans, right? So now we can kind of see how that evolves over time. And then at the bottom, you'll see the green bars, which tell you about the volume, right? So every hour we see the volume coming in. So this is the screenshot from the dashboard. And then we're going to break down some of the other kinds of traffic. So again, you're going to still see the dark red and the dark blue, but there's also other colors in here where we specifically mark the search engine bots, right? So like Tillman was saying earlier, some of the bots are good bots, right? The search engine crawlers, the feeds, some of these are legitimate bots. So we want to break those out and say, okay, what portion are those search? And that's marked as yellow. And then there's other bots that are also good where they declare themselves. And what we mean by that is they actually tell you they're a bot. They say their name in the user agent, right? So Moat bot, Facebook bot, other bots. So we still consider them honest because they tell you their name, okay? So those are marked as orange. When we get to the red, those are what we consider malicious bots. And those are the bots that deliberately disguise themselves as Safari or Chrome or Firefox, and they don't tell you they're a bot because they're trying to do something nefarious, right? They're trying to do some bad stuff, okay? So again, we break those out into the different colors. And then we can also check where the ads were loaded. So again, I'm using examples from the US, but again, any marketer there in the EU or in Germany can use these analytics to check where their ads are being loaded and also where the users are coming from. So again, at a minimum, you can see, okay, if you're targeting the German market, you got to make sure your ads are actually being shown there, right? It wouldn't make any sense for your ads to be shown in the US or in China or in India or somewhere else, right? You want your ads to be shown to users in your target market. So now when we see that there's dark red, we can now isolate that. And I'm going to talk through kind of a process for what we look at, right? So we want to ask, where's the dark red coming from? And so this is just a simple way of looking at, say, the domains and the mobile apps, which are generating that dark red, which are the fraudulent activity. So I've blurred out some of these just to protect some of these innocent ones. But when we see that there are certain domains that are sending a high amount of bot traffic to your site, right? Or they're causing a large amount of your ads to be loaded by bots. When we see those domains, the simple thing you do is go block those domains or add those to a block list in your campaign interface. And you can do the same with mobile apps. So again, you might have heard in some of the stuff that I've talked about before or written about. Here's a flashlight app that's loading millions and millions of impressions, right? On a flashlight app, humans don't actually use a flashlight continuously 24/7. And in fact, most modern smartphones have a flashlight functionality built into the phone. You don't need a flashlight app. But yet we see a flashlight app, keyboard app, alarm clock app. Some of these are the fraudulent apps that are committing a ton of ad fraud. When you see that in the data, all you have to do is add those apps to your block list so you don't buy from them anymore. Okay, so that's what we mean by we want to see where the ad fraud is coming from. And then when we look at some of the supporting data, so again, in contrast to the black box detection technologies, the point of using your own analytics is so that you can verify for yourself, why are we marking this as dark red? So again, we're focused on just the bots and the fraudulent ones. You can see that they're coming from data centers, right? So on the left-hand side, I've highlighted Amazon, Google, and then a few other data centers. So humans don't usually access the internet through Amazon data centers, Google data centers, right? They access the internet through their wireless devices or through internet connections at their home, right? So when we see a lot of these impressions being loaded from users coming from data centers, that is a signal of fraud. And then on top of that, some of these declared bots, some of these scrapers and some of these actual honest bots, you can clearly see they're also coming from data centers. But again, they're bots, and when you see that in your data, you actually want to block those domains. Okay. So now, again, focusing on the analytics, we can look at other things that would have an impact on the performance of your campaigns. So on the left-hand side, we see over frequency. And each of these fingerprints basically is a representation of a single device. So you can see the first one has 512 impressions loaded by that one device, then 490, 480, 460. So that's a ton of ad impressions loaded by the same device, right? So in this case, that suggests, okay, well, do you want all these ads to be shown to that particular user, or should you add frequency caps, right? So these are clues that you can use. Okay, and then on the right-hand side, we see consent strings. So we started to see evidence of faked consent strings. And what we mean by that is this consent string, right, which is supposed to be unique to the person and the device, is actually now showing up on devices in 10 different countries. So that's how we know that that's a faked consent string, right? Because the consent string should be pertaining to one device and one user in one location. Okay, so again, analytics can show us, things that are amiss. And then the final slide in this section is we look at where users click, right? So we have both desktop patterns, mobile patterns on the bottom left, and it looks entirely different than bot clicks, right? So we can actually see a lot of the bots click on the exact same location, and that's why we see those much larger circles, right? And so those are, again, repeated clicks. So when we see that, we can actually detect and reduce the fraud. So like I was saying earlier, as you start adding more domains and apps to the block list, you can actually see the fraud going down, right? So across from left to right, you can see the dark red getting reduced. Okay, so actually you can actually take action yourself. And then finally, we can compare different sources. Okay, so some have higher dark blue, which means more humans, and others have less, and then others have more dark red. So you can actually shift your budget allocation across these different sources. And then finally, you can shift your dollars to more human sources. So again, let me do a quick summary, and then we can kind of open it up for questions. When Tillman said at the beginning, a lot of the traffic on the internet is not humans, right? So about 40% of it's not even humans. Now, again, we're not saying if it's a good or bad bot, right? There are good bots, but if you just look at the whole, the internet as a whole, only about 60% of the traffic comes from humans. And then the bots are active, and there are both good bots and bad bots. And in my section, we focus on how bots are used for ad fraud and how that harms both the publishers and the marketers. And so then we talked about using fraud detection, right? But the problem with black box bot detection is that you don't know if they detected everything. You don't know if the measurement was correct, right? So the point is, if you have your own analytics, which you can talk to Fraud Zero about, if you have your own analytics on your site and in your ads, now you can see the data for yourself. And then when you understand, oh, now I understand why this is bot traffic. For example, it all came from a data center. Then you can actually take certain actions. So again, that's really the difference between having analytics versus using black box fraud detection. So I'll pause there and then turn it back to Tillman, and we'll open it up for questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Augustine. That was extremely insightful. We are already a little bit over the time, so I will just ask two questions that were from the audience. The first one is, how many, in your experience, how many SMEs in US and in Europe actually have an ad fraud problem? And secondly, how many of them have detection software in place?
So I'll answer the second question first. The small businesses, the small and medium businesses usually don't have detection in place themselves because the companies like Integral Ad Science and Double Verify, they're very expensive and they're meant for big marketers or big ad agencies to buy. So the smaller the company, the less likely they're going to have a fraud detection technology solution in place. But again, like I mentioned before, they may or may not be catching everything anyway. So it's better for the small business to have analytics. So most of those small businesses have Google Analytics in place. But like you mentioned before, Google Analytics cannot catch the advanced bots or the ones that disguise themselves. So again, that's why if they have these kind of fraud analytics in place, they can see that for themselves and then take action.
Yeah. And okay, fantastic. And how many of the SMEs have actually an ad fraud problem?
I think they're also exposed to this because if they're buying digital ads and their ads go to thousands and thousands of sites that they may not have heard of before, right? The same
Yeah.
rules apply, right? Those are fake sites, whether the ads are bought by a small company or the biggest brand advertiser, right? So if they're buying digital ads through programmatic channels, they will still be exposed to ad fraud. And the point is they need to go find out for themselves.
Yeah, fantastic. So we offer clients a free test of their website traffic. What do they need to do to get started?
It's actually very easy. It's just like installing Google Analytics on your site. It's copy and paste of 2 lines of code. And when you put that on the bottom of your pages, then you have the analytics. And then you can actually see what portion of the traffic coming to your site is from bots versus humans. And then you can also use that to measure your digital marketing campaigns. So for example, when you have a social media campaign running, when the clicks come through to your site, you can see whether those clicks are from humans or bots. And then similarly, if you have search ads or any other kind of ads, when they click through to your site, you can do that human versus bot measurement.
Super, fantastic. I think that's pretty much it. Let me just give you our email address. So just send me a quick email if you want to see what lies beneath your traffic. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Tillman from User-Centric. Thank you so much, Dr. Augustine.
Thank you.
It was a very, very interesting webinar. Brilliant. Thank you so much.